Hey everybody, hope everyone's doing all right out there. Hope you don't mind the quarantine hat. I have to wear this hat on every single video that I have because I don't even know where to get a haircut nowadays. So I'm rocking the hat on every single video. So that's what it's all about. But anyway, today I'm gonna go ahead and show you what compression is all about. And I'm gonna be using the same session that I used last time, this rap session. And then hopefully by the end of this video, you can kind of get a gist of what compression is, and how the different compressors are being used. There's several different compressors: VCA, Varimu compressors, FET compressors, so on and so forth. And I want to show you like when I would use certain kind of compressors for certain reasons, and how I compress certain tracks. So I'm gonna go ahead and just go through the main tracks, which is kick, clap, 808s on this one, and then the verse, and I'll show you what kind of compression I use on my master bus. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and just start with that because I always start with my master bus. I take a top-down approach when I do mixing. So if I show you my mix window over here, and we scroll here to the right, this is my master bus right here. And I have a few instances of plugins, but one of the main things that I'm using over here is a couple of compressors. And first and foremost, I'm using this Fairchild, which is an amazing Varimu compressor that has a lot of coloration and a texture to it. And I'm really using this mainly for the color and not so much of the compression itself. So if I play this track, you're probably going to notice very, very little, if even any amount of gain reduction. So let me go ahead and play this for you.
Yeah, this is just what I do. Constantly persistent, talent is not a given. I remember back then they used to trap in the kitchen, they would rap, I would listen, and suddenly had a vision that one day I would be rapping and people they would listen. I just hope that.
So really there's no gain reduction on here, and I'm just using it for the coloration of this specific, very vintage type of compressor that was used in a lot of old school stuff like the Beatles and really up until now. And very commonly you can use it on your master bus, which is what I'm using it for right now. But as you can see, when I bypass the plugin, the track got a little bit louder. And when I put the plugin in, the track got quieter. But not only did it get quieter, it provided some sense of warmness and less abrasive high end, in my personal opinion, when I'm listening to this. So that's kind of what I have. And furthermore, I'm using the side chain all the way up to about 500 hertz to the max, because I don't want this compressor to trigger low frequency instruments such as a kick. And especially with a rap track like this one, I want the kick to really be a big part of the sound of the mix itself. So if I didn't side chain all the way to 500 hertz, then the compressor would trigger the kick, and the kick will actually gain reduce because of the compressor itself. So I don't want to do that, especially in this kind of music. So that's what I'm using the Fairchild 674, mainly for coloration, not so much of the compression. And then I have another instance of this Varimu compressor, which is the Manly Varimu, which I really like. I just recently started using this on my master bus, but I really like the sound. It's very transparent, and I can go ahead and input and out A and B that as well. So let me go ahead and do that.
Yeah, this is just what I do. Constantly persistent, talent is not a given. I remember back then they used to trap in the kitchen, they would rap, I would listen, and suddenly had a vision that one day I would be rapping and people they would listen. I just hope that one day all my hard work will pay off. Never give a time today to try to take a day off. I'm something like Adolf, I'm taking over this rap game.
So this compressor, I'm hitting it a little bit hard, a little bit over 2 dBs of gain reduction. And when I mean hard, anything over 2 dBs of gain reduction in the master bus is a little on the hard side. You really don't want to compress too much on the master bus. But yes, but I am hitting this a little bit hard. Again, I got the high pass side chain on, and I just really like how this compressor kind of pulls everything forward in a nice way that's not too aggressive. It's a very smooth sounding compressor. So I had the opportunity to use a real one, and I really did like it. So I'm glad that I have the plug-in version of this. But those are the two instances of compression that I'm using on my master bus, and those two kind of work together very well, and that's why I use it. So That's the master bus. Now let's go ahead and go to the main grits of this stuff here. So here's my kick. Now this is a sample kick, and as you can see if I zoom in over here, that the kick is actually even in dynamic range itself. There's no fluctuation in volume at all. So really, there's really no need to use a compressor on this kick, but I did anyway, just to give it a little bit of flavor. And I'm using this R comp, which is a pretty standard compressor. It has this optical and electro setting to give it a different kind of sound, and then there's this warm and smooth setting that also further gives it another kind of characteristic. But as you can see, uh, this is barely there's no really no dynamic range on this kick, and I just have this here for just coloration and trying to make that kick kind of pull forward a little bit more. So if I solo this kick and I play it, here's how it sounds without the compressor. Okay, I'm gonna put the compressor in. So really, I'm really just using this compressor to just give it a little bit more gain, more so than anything. And as you can see with the compressor in, the kick kind of gets pulled up to your face a little bit. But you can use compressors to design your sound in terms of how you would want to shape the sound of the kick. And if I really want to go a little bit more aggressive, I can. So I'm going to demonstrate how I would use a compressor to design the kick if I wanted to, right? And I'm going to go ahead and put this compressor at an extreme setting, meaning I'm going to get a lot of gain reduction. So I'm going to pull this down and I'm going to pull the threshold down a little bit. And the next thing you know, the kick is going to start to sound really compressed. Now let's play with this attack and release settings. I'm going to put it at its fastest setting, and then you'll notice that the kick is going to sound a little bit different. So your attack setting is basically when do you want your compressor to kick in? It's a timing thing. So do you want it to kick in a millisecond after it goes above the threshold, 10 milliseconds after it goes above the threshold? So what you can think about in terms of attack is your transients, right? Especially with this kick. If your attack is all the way at its fastest setting, it's going to turn the transients of that kick down, meaning that it's not going to make it so spiky, and it's going to make it a little bit more rounder sounding, right? And as soon as you saw me pull back on the attack time, and then the punch of that kick went through, right? The spike of that kick, the beater of the kick kind of went through, and it's starting to cut through the mix a little bit. So I didn't want to completely flatten that transient down. So I chose a little bit more of a slower attack until I got the transients of that kick. And so that's how you can think of attack, and that's really a big one in terms of designing the sound. With the release, you can think of it more as how pull forward you want that kick to be versus how far away you want it to be. The release is basically how you want to think about the sustain of the instrument or the release of the instrument in terms of ADSR, attack, decay, sustain, release. And the way I think about release is when it's at its fast setting, then it's like you hearing more of that sustain. Versus if the release is at a slow setting, then the sustain is going to drop down and decay naturally. So I'm going to go ahead and play that for you, and then you can kind of hear the differences in the tonality. So it was pretty subtle in terms of the sound, but with the release pulled all the way in its fastest setting, it seemed like the kick was a little bit more up in your face. So that's kind of how I kind of want my kicks to be in a in a rap setting. So, and I didn't want the attack to be all the way at its fast settings. I want it to be slow enough where the transients of the kick comes through. So, it's kind of my my spiel about using the compressor and attack and release settings. So we'll move forward from there. So that's the kick. With a clap is a little bit more interesting. I was using a DBX 160 compressor over here, and as you'll notice that this is based on a very iconic compressor, the DBX 160, which is a VCA compressor, voltage control amplifier, and is very well used on percussive instruments and bass and all that kind of stuff as well. So I tend to use it a lot on my percussion, kick, snare, and clap, and all that kind of stuff. And I really like the sound of the compressor itself. But the interesting thing to note about this specific compressor that it does not have an attack and release setting, and the attack and release setting is program dependent, meaning that when you fluctuate your threshold settings, the attack and release change with it as well. At least that's how the original DBX worked. So, and then you have your ratio over here, and then you have an output gain over here. So I'm gonna pop this in and out, but you'll see how much of a role this compressor is playing in smoothing out the sound and not just controlling the dynamic range. So let's go ahead and bypass this. So this is how it sounds before, and then I'm gonna unbypass it, and then you can see how it sounds after. So I'm only getting about 5 dBs of gain reduction, and yeah, the output gain is a little bit lower, but you can see how really it smooths down those transients. And without the um, the DBX 160 in, it sounds a little bit more bright, and it sounds a little bit more abrasive in terms of the high frequencies. It sounds a little bit fatiguing to me, but with this DBX 160 and the way I used it, the it sounds a lot more smooth and bearable, and I really like that in terms of this compressor. So that's the spiel about this one. Um, so we can move forward. So kick, clap, and I'll go to my bass. A cool thing about this bass is I'm using the UA 1176 Rev A Blue Stripe 1176 compressor. And apparently this compressor is known for its distortion characteristics, and that's why I used it. In the beginning when I got this 808, it sounded too distorted, but in a way that I didn't really like it. So I took away a lot of that distortion using a low pass filter from this Fab Filter Q. And I took a lot of high frequencies out because I only want the 808s to predominantly concentrate on the sub bass frequencies. So I took all the way down to 450 hertz, 460 hertz. And then I'm using this compressor to control the dynamic range, but also get a little bit more distortion. And you'll notice that when I make the attack go at its faster setting, there's going to be more distortion on the 808. So let me go ahead and play that. And I'm going to go ahead and fluctuate this attack setting here. Yeah, so I feel like that's a fun thing, right? The kind of distortion sound that it makes from the 1176 Rev A. I'm going to bypass this completely so you can listen to how the 808 sound without compression on it. Okay, I'm going to put the compressor in. So really much of a fatter kind of sound with the compressor in there. So I like that. I like using the 1176 Rev A on bass and low frequency instruments just to get that kind of character out of it. So I'm a big fan of that. What else do I got? Vocals. Let's go to vocals. So vocals are pretty interesting. My vocal chain is as so. So the first thing that I do is I cut a lot of the low frequencies, and I cut some of the low mids as well. And then after that, I kind of use a compressor to even out the dynamic range. And for rap vocals, I really like the 1176 for it, just the characteristics of it. So I like that one. And let me go ahead and pop this compressor in and out so you can listen to the differences.
Yeah. Constantly persistent, talent is not a given. I remember back then they used to trap in the kitchen, they would rap. I would listen and suddenly had a vision that one day I would be rapping and people they would listen. I just hope that one day all my hard work will pay off. Never give a time of day to try to take a day off. I'm something like Adolf, I'm taking over this rap game. I'm Steph Curry in the motherfucking playoffs. You don't know how I am, I go ham on these beats. I don't rap just for nothing, try to make it out these streets. If we make it, then we made it. Everybody's gonna eat, don't ever try to hit me.
So you can see with this 1176 that it does pull the vocals forward, and with rap vocals you want it to be up front in your face, right? So that's kind of what I got going on. The attack is a little bit on the slower setting, while the release is more on the faster side. The attack is because I do want the transients of the vocals to pop through. So when he says cut or kitchen, those K's and those consonants pop through, and the compressor's not churning those down. And the release, that's a more upfront, in your face kind of sound with a faster setting. So I'm using that, and I'm getting about 5 to 7 dBs of gain reduction. I like to go a little bit. I just like, I'll notice that between 5 and 7, maybe a little bit more, you start to get the characteristics of the compressor a little bit more. Anywhere between 1 and 3, the compressor just sounds a little bit too transparent for me. So I like to aim for that 5 to 7 side. Just so I can hear the sound of the compressor itself. So that's what I'm kind of aiming for, and that's the vocals. The other thing that I like to do is use parallel compression on vocals, especially with rap vocals, and even singing every now and again. And I do feel like the parallel compression does add a sense of strength. Sometimes it could add a sense of aggression. And it depends on the way you use it, but I have very little instance of parallel compression on this vocal, and I'm using the Empirical Labs distressor. So let me show you that. So really cool plugin. I've also had the opportunity of using the real thing, and I really do like it. And I'm really going hard on this compressor. And I'm getting about 12 to 15 dBs of gain reduction. Let me show you how this sounds before and after.
Yeah. Constantly persistent, talent is not a given. I remember back then they used to trap in the kitchen, they would rap. I would listen and suddenly had a vision that one day I would be rapping and people they would listen. I just hope that one day all my hard work will pay off. Never give a time of day to try to take a day off.
There's a sense of aggression going on with the distressor, and it's not too obvious. It's a little bit on the subtle side. I got the return down about 20 dBs, but I do feel like it does hype the high end a little bit, and it does pull the vocals up forward a little bit, and it does provide an extra sense of strength. I usually have the Empirical Labs followed by an EQ, where I'm just cutting some of the low and maybe even some of the high frequencies, so it doesn't sound too abrasive. But yeah, 20 to 1. The attack and release settings are pretty in the middle, and I'm getting about 15 dBs of gain reduction. So really cool compression going on the vocals. And that is about it. That's kind of how I do compression. That's kind of the stuff that I use. I hope this really does help you. I really think that knowing the difference between a VCA, a FET, a Veramu compressor, and an optical compressor really does help. Knowing the history behind the compression, what's the history behind the Fairchild 670, what's the history behind the DBX 160 versus something more modern like the Manley Veramu and just understanding what those are, and you know, some of those really cool compressors like the distressor and all the neat things that it has, and the features that it have. It really does help when it comes to using the different kind of compression. So again, I hope this helps. Comment below if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. But I hope this helps. I'll see you around.
World with terror. No, you don't wanna go against my way. Be careful how you move. Tread lightly, play it safe.